Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good evening, friends. It is a crystal clear and chilly night here in suburban Chicago. I just got off the train and I'm walking home. What I'm doing now is talking to you about games a little bit, but I'm doing it by means of my once a month movie review segment. That's right, it's time for the January movie roundup, or the December-January movie roundup. For those of you who've been listening regularly, you know I did a movie roundup in early December, and then I haven't done one since. I try to do one about once a month. This episode is just going to hit some of the movies I watched in December and some of the movies I watched in January. I haven't planned it out the way I do sometimes, so I'm just going to talk about movie after movie till I get home. The one thing I'm not going to talk about are all the zombie movies I watched, because I teach my zombie class in January. So over the course of 13 days, I watched 15 zombie movies over the course of 13 days, and I did not include any of them on here. If you're interested in that, you can go look at my TikTok, where I did a video each day on my way to class and talked about what we were doing in my zombie class. So, boom, you can go check those out. What I want to talk about today are some movies that I watched in December and January that I haven't talked about yet, and thinking about the feelings that I got from them, whether I liked them or not, and then if there's a game that connects, what game is it? So to start out with, I want to talk about Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. Now, if you haven't seen the first Knives Out, you should go watch that. It's great. But Glass Onion is a very worthy follow-up. If the first Knives Out movie was as much about American politics and immigrants and wealth inequality as a subtext to the murder mystery that we were seeing, the second Knives Out movie seems very much to be about celebrity. Narratively, it's sort of about Elon Musk too, it feels like, but it was written by Rian Johnson during the quarantine when Elon Musk was not nearly as big a deal as he has been lately. So it's got a kind of serendipitous plot similarity, but really it's just about tech bozos more than one specific tech bozo. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in it as well. It's a twisty-turny mystery that is just a delight. Now, I think if you were interested in that movie and you wanted to pair it with a game, I think actually the How to Host a Murder Mystery Party games would be just the thing. In fact, part of the plot of the movie is that the tech bozo is hosting a murder mystery game. And so if you were to watch Knives Out, Glass Onion, and Knives Out mystery, and then play a murder mystery game as well, I think that would fit really well. And I would go with one of the ones that has people acting and have clues and stuff. If you don't have one of those or haven't ever seen one, they're actually pretty easy to find at like thrift stores. I've found tend to have them. So yeah, check it out. That's Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. Next up, I want to mention Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is an action movie that came out in the fall or in the summer maybe, and it is just bizarre. It's really delightful, but bizarre. The people who made it, the Danielses, actually made another movie that I thought was quite wonderful called Swiss Army Man that starred Daniel Radcliffe. And both movies have a wacky sensibility, a deep sense of heart, an engaged, thoughtful story, a sense of whimsy and hilarity in the way that they tell the story. They engage in sort of body humor, like the opposite of like body horror. Like the idea that your body might do something you didn't expect or act in a weird way plays in here. It's a remarkable story and well worth a look. I don't want to say too much more about it because the plot is so surprising that I wouldn't think it's worth. I think it's better to go in unprepared for it. Now, I don't know that I could say what game might be a good pairing for Everything Everywhere All at Once. My instinct is to say finding a game that's just super weird or super unexpected but still really good. You know, I often talk about Last Will as a really interesting game, but I think here the Prodigal's Club would be the one. Like, that's such a strange game. The theme of the game is really strange. Like, you are a wealthy scion trying to lose your money, your reputation, and not get elected to parliament. What a weird mix of things to have in a game. But there are other games that have equally weird plots. I haven't played it, but it seems like this might be a great opportunity to get a copy of Cosmic Frog from Devious Weasel Games, designer Jim Felly. Cosmic Frog is about these gigantic frogs that eat planets, and while that's not at all related to the plot of Everything Everywhere All at Once, it seems sort of symbolically similar. The third game I would suggest that seems like an interesting overlap for that movie would be A Study in Emerald. I've talked a number of times on this podcast about that game and about why I like it, but part of what I like about it is it's so surprising and weird, and these weird moments and delightful interactions happen, and I feel like the emergent glee that comes from playing that game feels resonant with the feeling I get from Everything Everywhere All at Once. So maybe there's your connection. All right, the next movie I want to talk about is The Black Phone. This is a horror movie starring Ethan Hawke, directed by, I think, James Wan, although I'm not 100% sure. This movie was not... so I will say, I usually don't watch trailers for movies, especially horror movies, when I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to watch them. So I enjoyed Ethan Hawke in Sinister, and I have enjoyed James Wan's work in the Conjuring movies, even though I don't particularly like the people on whom the Conjuring movies is sort of loosely inspired. But, so I knew, especially coming from A24, that Black Phone was going to be a movie I want to watch. It has a creepy poster, so I'm like, yeah, we'll watch it. I did not learn anything more about it. For some reason, I had in my head that whatever the Black Phone was, it was going to be a cell phone. I thought it was going to be a contemporary movie. Well, the movie takes place in like the 70s. It's based on a Joe Hill story, I learned later. And the Black Phone is like an old-timey Formica phone on the wall. Okay, that's fine. It didn't ruin the movie at all, but somehow the tone of the movie felt different for me. It did remind me a little bit of the Summer of 1984 movie. I can't remember what it's called. Might be Summer of 1984. That starred Rich Summer, excuse me. It reminded me a little bit of that in just because it's late 70s and early 80s or mid 80s feel very similar tonally. But the Black Phone has an interesting kind of escape room element to it. And so I would think the game that you would pair with the Black Phone would be one of the sort of more horror-themed escape rooms. I think it's called... I can't remember what it's called. So there's the one about the asylum, and I have another one. They're kind of horror escape room games. They have this neat grid of cards that you look at, and you pick out one card to examine more closely, and then you get to see what's on the other side, and you tell people about it. I think it's called The Awakening. Check the show notes for this. I'll definitely put a link to it there. It's a game I've played, and I'll put a link to the game, and I'll also put a link to the episode of the podcast where I talked about it. But I feel like the unavoidable horror at the heart of that particular game feels like a really interesting overlap to what's going on in the Black Phone. I think the other game that you could see as an interesting connection to Black Phone is Time Stories. The original Time Stories, which is, again, about an asylum. That original story, or I'm trying to think of which other ones were particularly creepy. That one was the creepiest. The one about ancient Egypt was pretty good too. I did not like the one. There was one that was sort of set in the Charles Manson house, or in the house where Charles Manson murdered a bunch of people. That one I did not really like. Although again, the serial killer nature of the movie Black Phone might make it a good connection for you. So that's what I would say. But really, I think it's The Awakening, I think is what the game is called. Would be a good pairing for that. All right, so that's all I want to talk about from December. And then I have a few movies from January that I watched. I watched a couple documentaries. In particular, there's a movie called The Pez Outlaw, which is it's a documentary about this guy who sort of a flight of fancy dreamer. He had wild schemes, and he discovered at some point that Pez dispensers, those little plastic things, were a coveted collectible, and that if you had access to Pez dispensers that weren't widely available in the market, that you could make good money on them. So he and his son started going to Europe and basically buying Pez that wasn't to be distributed in the US, out of like the back of factories, bribing people maybe, or it's a little unclear from the movie, although it sort of sounds like they think that people were doing under the table deals to sell Pez being manufactured in Europe to this guy, and he would bring them home in these duffel bags, and then he would sell them at like Pez conventions and stuff. And for a little while, he was making just a ton of money doing it. It's a really interesting documentary and sort of speaks to just a weird corner of the world. It was pretty bad in the end. It bankrupted him. He made some bad decisions, and Pez took a little bit of revenge. The company. Yeah, I thought it was an interesting discussion and documentary. Now, as I think about a game, what game would pair with this? Geez, it's weird. Honestly, I think the what you do is you find one of the Splatterspiel games, particularly I think Roads and Boats is the one that I've heard about that has like the weirdest things in it. Like there's geese, and there's some mechanism with geese that interfere with your commerce, and there's all these sort of weird nuances and corners in the game that allow for these sort of bizarre interactions. And I feel like, and you can, like in most Splatterspiel games, you can make a mistake and just totally destroy your own game just by badly anticipating what's going on or making a miscalculation. And so I feel like this documentary, The Pez Bandit or The Pez Outlaw, has some interesting overlap with the kinds of weird shenanigans that happen at the heart of a Splatterspiel game like Roads and Boats. All right, the next one I wanted to mention is Slumberland. Slumberland was a kids movie created, I think, for Netflix, starring, I don't know the name of the young actress, but a teenage girl, maybe she's 10 or maybe preteen, 9 or 10. And you have Khal Drogo, Jason, I can't remember his last name, as a sort of fantastical companion for her. And then you have Chris O'Dowd as a kind of real world disappointing uncle. And it's this girl who her father is lost at sea, and she has to deal with being orphaned and losing her father and trying to find her way in the world. It's a really compelling movie and frankly very sad. I liked it a lot, but it was really sad. It's also slightly inspired by the Winsor McCay Little Nemo in Slumberland comic strips. They make a couple nods to it. In one particular part, they have her bed grows these long legs and goes striding across the countryside. And she's also got this stuffed pig that is her companion. And as I recall in the comic strip, the boy's pillow acted like a dog in Dreamland. So with the title Slumberland and then a couple visual references to Winsor McCay, clearly that's being evoked there. But it's a sort of an adventure in a fantastical world where they're trying to solve problems. And it's a movie for children. I watched it with my son, and we had a nice time watching a pretty wholesome and heartwarming movie with some good adventure in it as well. If you think that's for you and you're looking for a good pairing, especially to watch with a child of yours, there's a couple options, both of them from Plaid Hat Games. I think depending on what age your child is and what kind of game you like. On one hand, you have Stuffed Fables, which is about a bunch of stuffed animals protecting a little girl from her nightmares. This game would probably be a little more accessible if you have a younger child or somebody who really likes story-focused games and the mechanisms part of it isn't too dramatic for them. And then we also have the sort of more complex version of that, which is it's not Chrononauts, it's Comanauts. It's Comanauts. It's people traveling into dreams and trying to rescue the person who's having the coma. It's again an interesting game, but very story focused in the line of the kinds of games that Plaid Hat makes in that sort of narrative space. So definitely something to check out if you think that sounds interesting and would be a nice pairing for Slumberland. Well, I'm just about home, so I think that's going to be the last movie I'll talk about. I did also watch a movie called Crooked House, a movie called Nope, Fantastic Beasts, The Secret of Dumbledore, Made You Look, a true story about fake art, which was really good. That's definitely worth checking out. I also thought Nope was amazing. And then Into the Woods, which is a musical I had never seen and I did not like very much. So that one. What is Crooked House? I don't even remember that. Oh, it's an Agatha Christie mystery with Glenn Close and a number of other luminaries. Well, worth a look if you like your Agatha Christie stuff. That was fine. But so head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 if you want a little off-topic conversation about films. What films have you seen? Do you think there's a better pairing than the ones I suggested for the movies you might want to watch? Head over there and let me know. Well, thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.